And that's the beautiful thing about God is even when we don't realize or see it, there's always the off ramp. There's always the U-turn that God allows us and will help us. But I was always also like get myself in a mess. And I'm like, well, Lord, I can't ask for your help. I'm the one that got myself into this. And which is great, but that's not how the Lord operates. His grace and his mercy are so infinite, and he will help us. That doesn't mean there's not consequences, but he will help us in every step of the way, to get off of that path that we shouldn't be on, a broken path, a messy path, whatever it looks like.
You're listening to Altered Stories with Michelle Renee Gutch.
Hello, Altered Stories show listeners, and welcome to my Season 3, Episode 132, featuring my special guest here from the KC area, Kimberly Wright. This is your chief storyteller host, Michelle Saunders Gutch. What a mouthful. And thank you for listening and watching my show that helps Christian women share their God stories so women around the world can hear them and never feel alone. And friends, I hope all is well. You're walking in God's peace during these challenging days. Know that I pray for all of you often. And if you need any special prayer, you can always reach out through my website at www.alteredstories.org. Now, friends, we're going to get this show started. And man, am I excited because today I get to bring Kimberly to the mic, who will be sharing her unlikely choice God story. I was really blessed to meet Kimberly at a KC Women's Leaders Missional Networking meeting here in the Kansas City area where she spoke. And I loved what she shared, friends. I thought her message was one of hope and encouragement and would bless many of you. Here is just a few words about her before I bring her to the mic. She is an accomplished business owner and executive leader. She's an author, speaker, and owner of 2 LLC companies. She was also selected as the Nevada Young Mother of the Year by American Mothers and has a degree in psychology from the University of Oklahoma. One other thing you want to know about her, she's a wife to John and has 4 children. So good afternoon, Kimberly. How are you today? And do tell us more about who you are.
Thank you. I am great, and I'm so honored to be on your podcast. I love your podcast and just love what you do to encourage women and to share our stories. So thank you for having me very much. So yeah, I've been married to John, to Mr. Wright, for almost 30 years. We've been together a little over 30 years now, and I think we're celebrating 28 years right this year.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it's flown by
That's about
fast.
as long as my husband and I have been married.
It goes by fast. I mean, some days
It
are
does.
long,
It
but
really
it goes by
does.
fast. So, and then we have 4 almost all adult children. My daughter's graduating high school in about 2 weeks. And then our oldest is 24. So I have 3 boys and a girl. And they're just the funnest, coolest people ever. We love hanging with them. So we're
Oh.
very, very blessed.
Oh, that's really cool because I'm sure they appreciate you and John too. I did notice, since we're just recent friends on Facebook,
Mhm.
you had a picture of your lovely daughter with prom. And,
Yes.
I'm sure you were just emotional about that because, I mean, what a beauty she is.
I know I'm biased, but I feel like she's just stunning. She's a beautiful girl inside and out. And it was, of course, her last prom. And so there's lots of bittersweet moments. We're making great memories. But man, the last one is hard, because you're always emotional when any of them graduate, when the boys graduated. But the last one, it's like, okay, this is my last time of doing this. And, the job description of mom shifts a lot when they're
Yeah.
all graduated. It's
Yeah.
never stopped being a mother, but the job description drastically changes. And so it's a little bittersweet, lots of emotions going on in mom's head right now, but very
Well,
proud,
yeah.
very
Y-
proud.
Well, to get Mother of the Year, Young Mother of the Year, wow.
Well, it was a surprise and a huge honor. And that was very dear to me because being a mother, I grew up in a broken home, which we'll kind of dive into
Yeah,
a
we'll
little bit
talk about
later.
that. Yeah.
But it was, all I wanted was just to have a family and be a great mom growing up. And
Oh,
so for just someone, outside of our little, circle of family, recognize and notice that was very humbling. And I just felt like it was a God hug. I was
precious.
very humbled and very thankful.
I love how God orchestrates the timing of guests based on,
Mhm.
what the climate is or what we're dealing with. And so that's so cool. So I honor your role as a mom and everything that you're doing and have done with your children. So thank you for
Thank you.
sharing that.
Yeah.
Uh, Um, so Kimberly, we have talked about the God story component and why, stories are so compelling to me.
Mhm.
And I would love to hear from you why you think it's so important for women to share their stories, their God stories, their testimonies.
Well, I think one, we're called to glorify God. And, one of the beautiful things that I have learned firsthand through my life is that God never wastes a hurt, that He can, repurpose every wound that we have, dealt with and encountered and given to Him, and He will use it for His glory. But I also believe that our stories and our testimonial is, you know, we can be somebody else's tour guide. They're to get them through something.
Yes,
Because we've endured it, we've lived it, whatever it is. And that could be the exact thing that somebody needs, is like just to know they're not alone, and that, oh, okay, if she survived that, then I can too. And it's just a source of hope. So I think it's important to share our stories and to be willing to share the hard things, because everybody's going through something all the
yes,
time,
they, yes.
So,
And, one of the things I haven't really tapped into, but I'd like to hear from you. How do you go about preparing? How did you go about preparing to share your God story?
you know, I don't know that you can prepare necessarily, other than prepare our hearts, because
Hmm.
we never know when God's going to, provide the opportunity for us to share. And so I really try to spend time in His Word and just praying. Um, and, you know, we, s- I've been guilty of this, and I think sometimes a lot of other people are, that we think prayer has to be so eloquent and it has to use all of the big terms, like, you know, sanctification, or whatever it is that the gospelese that we grew up hearing. And
Yeah,
really our prayer is just an honest conversation with God.
it
And
is.
the best, sweetest times that I spend in the presence of the Lord is the times where I'm just being real, and I'm sharing the good, bad, and ugly. God knows anyway, so we might as well just say it and get it, get it out in the open between us. Um, but because we can't hide our emotions and our thoughts from God. So
Nope,
I think God, He works the best with the real conversations. And to me, that's beautiful prayers.
it is. And the authenticity of this show is very important from my perspective. And I felt God really calling me to make sure that the stories that we share are authentic,
Mhm.
and, come from the heart
Yes.
because, my hope has always been that women's hearts will be changed from
Mhm.
a story or will be, healed.
Mhm.
And I don't think we as a society understand that,
Yeah.
how important it is because so much comes from and out of the heart.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate you sharing that as we move into what you're going to share for us. And I am so
Yeah.
excited. So let's go ahead and move forward now.
Mhm.
And um, we talked about your God story being called a unlikely choice God story.
Yes.
And so, Kimberly, can you share with us where your unlikely God story began and take us through?
Yes, absolutely. I chose the title of that of the unlikely choice, and that started originally when I was studying Gideon. And
Hmm.
for those that may or may not be familiar, Gideon, God called Gideon in to be a leader to deliver the Israelites. It was after another time of oppression, following another time of their rebellion, and so forth. And you know, Gideon was hiding in a wine press and he was feeling defeated. And God came and said to him, you're a mighty warrior. And he was like, oh, I can't, I can't do anything. I'm the least of my clan and so forth. And it's the same with, Moses had a stutter when God called him. So not that I'm anything like Gideon or Moses of that caliber, but I have seen everything looking back. The rearview mirror can be dangerous because we don't want to live in the past. But when we can reflect and look back and see everything that God has done for us and carried us through, it definitely strengthens our faith for tomorrow. And so, I don't, people often ask me if they want to hear my salvation story.
Yeah.
And, because a lot of people have that encounter with Jesus, maybe later in life, or there was something big and significant. I can't remember a time that I didn't have Jesus.
Yeah.
You know,
I hear that a lot, Kimberly. I
yeah.
really do.
And I'm so thankful for that. I mean, there's definitely been times where I can see there was some spiritual growth during those times, but
Hmm.
I've never felt like I was living without Jesus. And when I was small, my mom and dad both, went back to work. My mom was a nurse, my dad was a truck driver. And when I was about 6, 8 weeks old, my mom went back to work as a nurse. And so my grandma cared for me. And I spent um more than a great deal of time with my grandma, and a lot of my childhood actually lived with her.
I see.
And so she, from to teach me to talk, taught me to sing Jesus Loves Me songs. And that's how I learned to talk, was singing those songs. And,
Wow.
she just would read me Bible stories. And it was very much ingrained in me. And then when I was 5, I remember an altar call. And when I was, that small, and my Aunt Jean, I was like, I want to go be saved. And so my mom's sister said, I'll go to the altar with you. So I went down at 5 years old and got saved. And, but I remember Jesus even before then. And so, um, I'm just so thankful for his presence because my parents divorced when I was 5. And I had a very unstable childhood, moved a
Yeah.
lot.
That's
Um,
hard.
it was
Moving
very
is very
difficult.
hard.
It is. Um, and fortunately, it was all within like kind of a 30-mile span, but still, you're just always packing and unpacking and, just, feeling very unsettled and uprooted. And my mom really struggled with stability, and she had been married several times. Um, and then my dad got remarried when I was in 5th grade, and he moved away, so I didn't see him very much,
Hmm.
after that.
Hmm.
And so, it was just, there was a lack of stability and that figure in my life other than my grandma of being a constant presence, an adult. Um, but I moved in with my grandma and grandpa when I was in 5th grade, when dad moved away. And my grandpa took me to a little 5th grade basketball game. Well, grandma stayed home and made us some chocolate pies, and we were going to run to the game, a little tournament, and then go back home and, have our pies. And it was in January, January 22nd of 1982. And I came out from grandpa said he was going to go warm up the car because it was
Yeah.
cold out. And so
Yeah.
I came out and I couldn't wake him up. And so
Oh,
he was still or still alive, but unconscious. He had had a heart attack. So I had to go back in and, call for help and so forth. And he was only 58 years old.
yeah.
And so
That's very young.
it was very young. Of course, now I see how young it is, but when you're 11 years old, it seems,
Yeah. You
you
don't.
don't realize
Yeah.
how young it
Yeah.
is.
No.
But that was, I feel like I had been through a lot of unsettling and some things that felt traumatic, but that was the first real traumatic thing in my life that I had to deal with, of
Hmm.
just not really knowing how to reconcile adult events, in an 11-year-old brain. And it was very devastating for my grandma because, um, other than when grandpa went to work, they did everything together and she typically went everywhere with him. Um, and so this was, a break from the routine.
Hmm.
So that stirred up a lot of, fears and anxiety that I carried into adulthood of, okay, you can't break from routine or because something bad will happen, and just be ready for the unexpected. So that's, kind of what I learned that night. Um,
Mm.
and then you fast forward, and I was a freshman in high school, and now I have to tell you, I lived in a very small town,
Yeah.
very tight community. Like at the time, there was maybe 750 people there, and so everyone knew everyone, which was a blessing. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's one of those. It's a blessing and a curse because you're,
Yeah.
you know.
I get that from
So
some of the small towns I've lived in growing up.
yes, but so I was a freshman in high school, and it was at the end of our day at the school, and we were changing clothes for basketball practice for the last hour. So it was about, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And so some of my girlfriends came over, and they're like, oh, people are coming to get their kids. There's been a shooting. And they said the man's name, that he's gone on a rampage and he shot and killed a bunch of women. And I just like instantly came over me. I was like, oh, that's my mom. I know that's my mom because she was friends with his ex-wife, the man's ex-wife. And I was like freaking out, of course, and everybody's like, what do why, how do you know? And one girl's like, okay, let's just go call my mom. Let's go find out. And so she's like, she was a senior and she was trying to get,
Help
let's
you. Yeah.
help me and stuff.
Yeah.
And as we were going towards up the stairs towards the principal's office, the coach was coming to get me. And so obviously we knew then. And all I knew at the time was that she had been shot in the head. And so what had happened is that my mom's friend Belle was getting a divorce, and she had been divorced from this man before. They got remarried and so forth, but
Yeah.
he had been abusive in the past. And so my mom and Belle, this lady, were nurses together. They worked on the same shifts for years and had been friends for years. And there was a couple of other nurses that were friends that ran in that little pack, and then their hairdresser, who was also a close friend. And they had all been asked to come testify as character witnesses. Well, they ended up not
Against him.
having to do that.
Hmm.
But they just kind of sat outside, and then they went and had lunch together. And my mom went home, and she was just 1 block around the corner from the hair salon. And so the three of the ladies were at the hair salon, and as they came out, Belle came out first, the ex-wife. He shot her in the in the head twice. One lady, the hairdresser, bent down over her. He shot her. The other lady tries to take off running. He shot her. So these three ladies now are laying, and there was a bar, a local bar down the strip mall, and so there were eyewitnesses to it all. And then he left there and drove around the block and came and knocked on my door and or mom's door, but I was at school, but it was our
Yeah.
house. And
Yeah.
and so when she opened the door, she was looking down the barrel of the shotgun, and he said, "I'm going to kill you like I did the rest." And so they fought back and forth, and they fought. He hit her a lot trying to take the gun, and she got the gun away from him and threw it down to take off running because there was a gas station across the street that she was
Yeah.
trying to go for. And I think she was looking over her shoulder because it was just a God's timing that
Yeah.
she happened to look over her shoulder when he shot her, and it went in right here, but it came out, here. So it was
Right
more
there.
of a glance. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but from the fighting, she did lose her eye. Um, and she had lost all of her friends that day. And so he went back up and ended up taking his own life waiting when the cops arrived. So just going through that and seeing, going to the hospital and seeing, our house on TV, and just all my friends standing around outside Yellow
Yeah.
Tape, and it was just a very surreal thing. But that just compounded, the anxiety, and of course the bad things happen, when things are going well, kind of mentality in
Mm-hmm.
my head.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, that just, there was a lot of layers of what that puts on a child from, growing
Yeah.
up. And now at that point, I'm, 14, I think, years old. And, you know, eh, God just has been faithful through all of that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I all I craved was like calm and family and just a stable home, and that's where God has been so good and so faithful. But of course, the enemy will never leave us alone. He knows our fears. He studies
Yes.
us, and he knows our insecurities and our anxieties, and so he will, just always attack that. Um,
Yes, he will.
you know,
Well, I'm going to tell you what you just shared. It's not easy to share what you shared because they're trauma triggers. And
mhm,
sometimes even when we tell our story, it does sometimes set us back. And so there's I just want my audience to know and understand that these things are not easy sometimes
yeah,
to revisit.
yeah,
But each time you do talk about it, you do share it, I think it does continue to take you to that freedom and
mhm,
that release from those experiences. And praise God that your mother
mhm.
did not die
Yeah,
from that. I
yeah,
mean, between what you encountered with some of the things that just had happened and then going through and then all the other things, although albeit her friends and your whole community, I mean, you all had to have experienced
yeah,
that trauma from being even exposed to that
yeah,
in your community. I mean, I know when I was um, dealing with the fallout of the Columbine shooting, I mean,
mhm,
it was in the community that I lived in, and my niece and nephew went to the school, and my husband had an interaction with the killers before they actually shot
mm,
all of the students at the school.
yeah,
I mean, it's it seems to touch a lot of
mhm.
areas in communities. And so, did you have to go through any kind of trauma counseling, Kimberly? I mean, even though you said God was with you and all of that, how did you see the hand of God work in your life there?
I definitely should have had counseling, but
Yeah,
I don't think my family knew to
that you
do that.
should, or yeah,
Yeah, or that even they probably should. I mean, it was just something that we just prayed our way through and we were thankful for. But I think God does. I mean, I would hate for anybody to think there's shame in counseling. I got
yeah,
counseling later after I got
yeah,
married.
yeah. At some
Um,
point, yeah,
yes. And but it was a lack of knowledge. It wasn't oh, well, God will do this, so we don't need that. We didn't know
Yeah.
that, it was a small town. You don't necessarily have those things even available.
Resources. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I am a big advocate for godly counsel and,
Yeah.
having someone to talk to and to unpack those things. And I think it's very important. I mean, you were talking about the how it can be triggering and that some people don't want to talk about that. And I respect that, but I also always want to be careful of Satan when we keep things, he likes
Yeah.
to keep things in the dark.
He
And when
does.
we speak it out, we bring it to light and bring it before God, Satan loses some of his grip on that. Because if we keep it inside and we are like, like even let's say I was 30, well, how old was I when I got married? I was like 26. You know, and yeah, that happened when I was 14.
I
And so it would
know.
be very easy to say, oh, well, gosh, that's been 12 years. I should be over that now because that's what Satan would want you to believe. There's something wrong with you that it still affects you. There's something wrong with you that you're still upset by it or that you're still anxious about it or that you still are carrying effects from those two traumatic events. That's the lies of the enemy. And that's why I wanted to get counseling. I was living in a bigger city and then, had the
Yeah.
money and the
Different things.
resources, right.
Yes. Yes.
But I was like, I don't want to bring that brokenness into this marriage, without putting forth the work for
Yeah.
the healing and so forth. And so I found a great godly psychologist that she talked to me a lot about scripture, but she also you know, reinforce that, it's okay that you're not past this. There's no timeline on grief. There's no, deadline on, oh, okay, well, you've got 6 months or
Yeah.
whatever it is, and then you should be past it. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I do know that time heals all wounds in that way too. And so between what you shared and where you are now, you can just hear the blessing of what God has brought into your life in terms of stability and relationships and things like that as you continue to go forward and live the calling and purpose of what you are meant to be as a wife and a mom and the leader and all those things. And um, the story, that you share, I mean, you talk about unlikely choice, right? So can you zero in a little bit on that for us too? So when you talk about the unlikely choice, is it because you were put in situations that you didn't expect? And, you're like, "Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
why am I here?" I mean, help us
Yeah.
lean into that a little.
I think the thing that really held me back from obeying God's calling sooner to be,
Mhm.
to minister to women and to be an encourager to women was really it started with, the Satan used the traumatic events to give me fear and anxiety. But, when I went to college, because my grandma, who was a praying woman, but we didn't have conversations like I have with my kids about, premarital sex or don't drink and drive or da da da. I mean, I talk about
Yeah,
the dirty, nitty gritty with my kids, and there's no
yeah,
topic off, limits
it's
for
good.
me with
Yeah,
my kids. But I didn't have that growing up,
yeah.
and so you know I never went wild when I was at college, but I started partying and I started dating a lot. And, there is a definite effect
Mhm.
of, not having a father figure, my grandpa dying when I was young, and then not having a father figure in my life. And so
Yeah,
you crave that male approval and you know,
yeah,
so you you date more, or you compromise things that you shouldn't. And so then you find yourself, I mean, we've all heard that saying that sin will take you farther than you ever meant to go. Um,
Right.
and so, I've found myself in situations where I'm sure other people have, not maybe not everybody, but there have been some of us that we feel like we go so far down this path. It's like, how do I turn around? How do I, how do
Yeah.
I, where's the U-turn option? Where's the off ramp? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the beautiful thing about God is even when we don't realize or see it, there's always the off ramp. There's always the U-turn that God allows us, and will help us. But I was always also like I get myself in a mess and I'm like, well, Lord, I can't ask for your help. I'm the one that got myself into this, you know,
Yeah. But
and
you
yeah.
did, you took responsibility.
Yes, and which is great, but that's not how the Lord operates.
No.
His grace and his mercy are so infinite, and he will help us. That doesn't mean there's not consequences, but he will help us in, every step of the way, to get off of that path that we shouldn't be on, a broken path, a messy path, whatever it looks like. And so I just felt like a lot of shame and guilt. I didn't come from a stable home and I didn't have a stable background. And I had, and then I was the girl whose mom got shot. And, there's all
Oh,
these
yeah.
labels that we self-inflict and we, put on ourselves that the enemy will use in every way he can,
Yeah.
to silence us and to keep us in bondage. And that's why I say sometimes we all feel like an unlikely choice of like, why would God ever choose me? I'm so
Mm-hmm.
unworthy. I'm so, you know, I have such a past, or I've done this, or I've done that. And, that is the beautiful thing about about God's infinite grace and mercy is he
Yeah.
has a calling and a purpose for each one of us. As long as they're air in our lungs, we have a purpose for being here. And
Yes.
and so God will use that mess and that testimony and all those things, to honor him and to
Yeah.
also encourage someone else.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And, you know, the authenticity in how you're sharing here, Kimberly, is really important.
Mm.
I mean, you're not sugarcoating it, you're being very authentic. And I think God honors that authenticity too. And when we are honest with God, He wants that in our relationships, right? I mean, our relationship with Him. And I think that that's when He can really work,
Yeah.
is when we can get real.
Yes.
And so your transformation, I mean, it seemed to me like it was just
Mm.
a journey of
Yes.
transformation.
Yes.
And now, of course, you being the wife and the mom and all the things that God is using you, what you're doing and how you're being with your children. Did your mother get a chance to get to know your kids? I mean, she
She
had that
did.
injury and everything, right? But I
Yes.
wasn't sure how severe and
So
stuff.
she did lose her eye and she had, scarring her entire life. But again, it was just the grace of God that
Mhm.
she, didn't have any brain damage or, any of that. But my mom had already struggled with low self-worth
Mhm.
and, was always seeking something. And this also, just kind of made that a little worse.
Mm.
And she was
Okay.
raised in a Christian home and knew God and knew that God had spared her life and was never quiet about that. But it was really the last, she's been gone 2 years now, but it's really the last 20 years, I think, of her life where
Mhm.
she really made peace and started, and she was going to church consistently and involved. They went to a small country Baptist church. They lived in an even smaller town than, this happened in,
Yeah.
and her and my stepdad. And um, so I'm very thankful to see how God allowed her to have that sweet time getting to know
Before.
him,
Mhm.
because she was always just worried about she wasn't good enough to go to heaven. And
Yeah.
none of us are good enough to go to heaven.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
That's true. So
Yeah.
many people even say, I'm not good enough to be worthy of being a Christian. I can't. And they don't understand it's not anything that they do. It's
Yeah.
all what God does, right?
Hmm.
Um, but it's still a mindset.
It is.
And so this story is really good for so many reasons in what you're sharing here. So, I mean, I did did you during this time too, did you share that with your children? Did they know when what you had come through?
Hmm.
And they, you know,
Yeah.
have that understanding, I'm assuming.
They do. I mean, we've talked a lot about my childhood, and then, it's a little bit of a joke, but it's, n- not in a mean-spirited way.
Yeah.
If they start making jokes about their rough childhood, and they all know they're abundantly blessed, and so it's always just kind of teasing type thing. I'll say, okay, well, let's talk about childhoods, and they're like, oh no, you're not allowed to play. You're depressing. No, because they
Oh,
know, just so much of what I went through. I mean, I've been very open and honest with my kids, and there was a season when my dad first got married. I was living with him and his wife and her two children, and she would tell me to leave and not come home until my dad came home. So, and he worked until sometimes 9 o'clock at night. And so there was many nights, wandering the streets of like hanging out with friends, and then they had to go to bed. So then I had nowhere to go, kind of thing. Um, there was a lot of things that happened in my childhood that just was hard to overcome. And I'm so thankful that God carried me through that, because
mhm,
I didn't have that human provision. There was
mhm.
nobody protecting me. There was nobody there seeing where I was at or making sure I was home at this time. I mean, I'm, comparatively speaking, like I would be considered a helicopter mom, knowing where my kids are and who they're with and da 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 da. And,
Yep.
compared to my mom had no idea most of the time. My dad had no
Yeah.
idea. Of course,
Yeah.
we didn't have cell phones and all the tracking things back then that we
Yeah.
do,
Oh,
you
yeah, it's
know?
changed. So
Right.
much changed,
Very much
and
so.
has. So you wonder really what it would have been like, but you never know. I mean, it
Mhm.
sounds like both your parents at that time were caught up in their own humanity and things
Yeah.
going on. And that does happen. And it
Yeah.
happens a lot, even in very affluent areas, with parents. And it's all our history and our brokenness
Mhm.
and different things that aren't healed. So it is so important, even um, for the families that were affected by the shooting, those ladies, and
Yeah.
all of those. Do you ever talk with any of your friends or anyone in your old community that had that experience with their mom being shot and passing? Or
Um, None of the ones that passed
yeah,
had children that,
okay,
um, and so I was, kind of the only one that, was around that. But, and ironically, such as a small town, the man who, um, did the shooting was the
hmm,
brother-in-law of my aunt. So, like he had
small,
married into that family kind of thing. And so, it was just a small community.
yeah,
And, um, there was some always, different camps of, somebody aggravated or instigated this, and then others are, these women are victims, and you can't let
yeah.
any of
You have to
that.
go on.
Yeah,
Hmm.
you just have to move on. But God has always been very faithful. And that's the thing is, I think too, like one time because my dad was not a believer growing up, and I don't know if he is now, but he was not, when I was young. And he made the comment, well, why would you even want to be a Christian? Look at the bad things that happened to, and he rattled off a few people that were devout believers and followers of Christ. And, and of course I was 10, 9. I don't know,
Yeah.
really know how to answer that. But it's the world. We live in a fallen world, and
Yes,
God
we
is
do.
with us, but you know,
Things are going to
he's on his
happen.
throne, but life is going to happen. I mean, there's still
Yeah.
disease, there's still murders, there's still horrible things, you know.
Yes.
Um, John and I suffered 5 miscarriages throughout our marriage, and
Oh,
that was
wow.
devastating. My As my son was going into his senior year of high school, our house burnt down, you know, and we were homeless basically for, had to live in a hotel for 11 days and then till we could find another place to live for 9 months. And, bad things happen, and our children have seen that
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Um, but we just have to keep our hope and our faith in Christ.
Yeah. What a beautiful way to end this story. And the encouragement, because I was going to ask you what, kind of your last words for my listeners, any strengthening scriptures or, words of wisdom or tidbits or anything for someone maybe who's on the edge and struggling coming through trauma or chaos or, just having a hard time moving forward,
Yeah.
what words of wisdom you might
You
have
know,
there.
I will share. This has been, there's every verse is my favorite verse, kind
Yeah.
of thing. There's so
Yeah.
many in the Bible that are so timely and just what we need.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that I feel like the anchor, my life verse is 2 Timothy 1:7. And God says he did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-discipline. And some of the translations of self-discipline say a sound mind. And I
Hmm.
love that, because when we can take every thought captive, make it pleasing to God, we can have that sound mind. We can have peace. We can be free of anxiety, free of fear. God gave us those things, that power of love and self-discipline, spirit of power, love, and self-discipline, and not a spirit of fear. And every time we feel fear or anxiety, we need to recognize that comes from the enemy, and that's just a stronghold. And the reason he's after us is because God has something good for us, and he has a purpose for us. And so I think that's what we just need to remember, is when we're feeling low and we're feeling like we're locked in fear, that just means the enemy's coming after us for a purpose, because he doesn't mess with people that God doesn't have God has a plan for everybody. But if he's not calling you to something, the enemy has nothing to go after, you know. And so
Yep.
I just think it's important to remember that.
Well, I think that's great. And also, how can we support you, Kimberly? Like in the work that you're doing now, what can we do to support you? Feel free to share about what you might have out there on your website, any of your contact info. If you're
Yeah, thank
speaking,
you.
I mean, you have a lot of different tidbits, I think, that are just very, very encouraging and uplifting, and you're shining your light. So, want to find that out.
Well, I appreciate that. So I am getting a new website, but you can still go to the old one, and it's perceptionleadership.com. And so you can, contact me through that. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram a lot. So K Writer, KWRIGHTER is
Okay.
usually how to find me. And, I would love to connect, but I do speak. I love to speak at churches and women's conferences, workshops. But I will tell you, and I've shared this with you, is that I have such a heart for Christian businesswomen and businesswomen in general, but I really love to support and encourage those women who God has called in to work outside of the home.
Hmm.
I've been a stay-at-home mom and I've been a working mom, and they're both very hard and have challenges and both rewarding, but God calls us to different seasons and different places. And so I love training and supporting women how to be all that God called them to be, and to show up strong in their leadership, and to embrace the place that God has them in their vocation in this season. And so I'm very passionate about that, and just love to share. And I like to teach what I learn, because I'm always learning new things, and
Yes.
we never stop growing. And so I just want to pass that along.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, we need that. Lots of women need that support. So it's so awesome that you would give yourself and put yourself out there for that. Thankful for the crossing that God allowed for us.
Yes.
And friends, we're going to have this beautiful lady's testimony and story out on our episode page and have her links and contact information. And now, friends, it's time to hear a mental health tip from our ministry partner and licensed mental health counselor, Sherry Puckett.
Hello, friends. This is Sherry Puckett, licensed professional counselor. And today I want to talk about unhealthy relationships and fellowship. How many of you have someone in your life that is literally driving you nuts? They are constantly putting you down. You can't do anything right. You're walking on eggshells. They're saying they don't like the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you do your hair. They don't like anything about you, and it just is literally draining you. If you are going through this, you are in such good company. I believe that all of us have experienced that at some point in our lives. Here is my mental health tip to you. Do not make this person a mini God in your life. Now that may sound insane. You may be thinking, what in the world? How and why would I make this person a mini God in my life? Let me tell you how it happens, and sometimes it happens when we're not even aware of it. When you allow this person to hijack your thoughts, taking God's seat of authority in your mind, you have created a mini God. You have given them God's seat of authority in your thoughts and in your mind. Oh my goodness. So how in the world do we do this? When you agree with the words that are spoken over you by this unhealthy person, in other words, if you go around saying, oh, wow, they're right. I've got to lose 15 pounds. I've got to lose 50 pounds. I'm so fat. I'm so dumb. I'll never learn this. I'm just ignorant. Or whatever you say about yourself, you are literally giving them a seat of authority in your mind, because that's not who God says you are. 1 Corinthians 1:9 says this: God is faithful, by whom you were called into fellowship of his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. So when you have fellowship with God through Jesus Christ, you are in full agreement with God and what he says about you, and you are walking in your true identity. True identity. Many of you are pulling the seat out for the enemy to come and sup with you. Many of you believe all the things that are spoken over you, and you're breaking bread with the enemy of your soul. God knows that this is happening, and he's saying, do not allow this to happen. Sit at my table. Allow me to take that seat of authority in your thoughts and in your mind, so that you can walk in truth and know who you are and know that you are my beloved child. So we basically have two options here. We can either have fellowship with the unhealthy person in our life and break bread with them and believe all the lies and eat all the garbage that they're feeding you, or we can say, God, you are God in my life, and there is no one like you. And I prepare the table in my mind and in my heart for you alone. And I will only come into agreement with the words that you speak over me. All right. I hope that makes sense to you. And I hope you are encouraged by the fact that God himself is God, and he sings over you with so much joy and delight. So my friends, we need to be very careful about our relationships. If it's super unhealthy, you may need to get out of that relationship. And if it's someone that you're close to, you need to have a healthy boundary. But you always want to come into agreement with God. So take care of your mind, take care of your heart, surrender it all to Jesus, and walk in your true identity. All right, I will see you next time. Thank you.
And until the next show, friends, be heard and be healed.
Altered Stories Ministry is a faith-based, nonprofit, and women's evangelistic storytelling ministry. If you enjoyed listening to today's story, your family and friends would probably benefit from hearing how God works in the lives of women all over the world, too. So please, subscribe to our show and share the link to this podcast. Share it on your social media. We also welcome your valued feedback on our stories. Also, we'd appreciate your prayerful consideration in sponsoring one of our future God-glorifying stories and welcome your tax-exempt financial donation. To find out more on how you can support our ministry, you can log on to our website at www.alteredstories.org.